So Scott Moe just publicly praised Mark Carney, and I'm pretty sure hell just froze over. No, seriously, check the weather in Saskatchewan because the Premier, who has spent the better part of a decade treating federal Liberals like they personally kicked his dog, just stood in front of cameras and gave Carney credit for something. Not grudging credit. Not backhanded compliment credit. Actual, genuine, this is a positive agreement credit. Saskatchewan farmers are about to get tariff-free access to Chinese markets for canola meal and peas, worth billions to the economy, and Moe looked directly into the camera and said credit to Prime Minister Carney like he didn't just break a decade-long streak of federal government criticism. Welcome back to Canadian Insights, where today we're diving into the trade deal that made a Prairie Premier say something nice about Ottawa, why canola is apparently worth $44 billion and employs more people than some small countries, and what this tells us about the absolute Wild West of Canadian politics in 2025. Let's get into it. First, let's just appreciate the moment for what it is. Scott Moe, the Premier of Saskatchewan, the guy who has made a political career out of fighting with the federal government over carbon taxes, equalization payments, resource development, and basically anything else you can think of, just held a press conference at the University of Saskatchewan to announce a Canada-China trade deal and then said, and I quote, "I credit Prime Minister Mark Carney and the federal government, which I haven't done a lot of in the last decade." That's not paraphrasing. That's not me adding context. That's literally what he said. He acknowledged out loud that he hasn't been giving the feds credit for much of anything, and then proceeded to give credit anyway. That's character development right there. That's growth. That's what happens when a trade deal is so good you can't even spin it negatively without looking ridiculous. So what's in this magical agreement that broke Moe's decade-long silence on federal praise? Tariff elimination on canola meal and peas going to China. Now, if you're not from the prairies, you might be thinking, okay, cool, some agriculture stuff, why does this matter? And that's fair because most Canadians probably don't spend their evenings thinking about canola market access. But here's the thing, canola is massive. We're talking a $44 billion industry. That's billion with a B. It employs over 200,000 Canadians. That's more people than live in Regina. It's a cornerstone of the prairie economy, and Saskatchewan produces about 55% of Canada's canola. So when Moe says this is significant for Saskatchewan farmers, he's not exaggerating for once. This is genuinely huge. And it's not just canola. The deal also covers peas. Which sounds less exciting until you realize that pulses are another major prairie export, and tariff-free access to the Chinese market means Saskatchewan producers can actually compete on price with other global suppliers. China's got 1.4 billion people who need to eat, and Canada's got prairies full of crops ready to feed them. This deal removes a major barrier that was making Canadian products more expensive and less competitive. It's Economics 101. Remove tariffs, lower prices, increase sales, benefit producers. Simple in theory, complicated in execution, which is where Carney apparently came in. Because here's the thing that Moe specifically called out, Carney engaged earnestly at all levels of the Chinese government. That phrase is doing a lot of work. Engaged earnestly is diplomatic code for actually showed up, did the work, had the difficult conversations, and didn't just phone it in. And at all levels means this wasn't just one meeting with one official. This was comprehensive diplomacy across multiple government departments and levels of authority in China's system. That's not easy. China's government is massive and hierarchical, and navigating it requires skill, patience, and actual diplomatic capability. The fact that Moe, who again, has not been Team Federal Government's biggest fan, is specifically crediting Carney's personal engagement tells you that whatever Carney did, it worked. Ralph Goodale, the former Liberal MP from Regina who served 26 years in Parliament before recently retiring, weighed in on this and said it was absolutely essential for Carney to pivot towards a trade deal with China. And Goodale's not wrong. Canada's relationship with China has been, to put it mildly, complicated lately. We've had the Huawei situation. We've had detained Canadians. We've had diplomatic freezes and tensions and all kinds of awkwardness. Trade with China dropped. Relationships soured. And for prairie farmers who rely on Chinese markets for huge portions of their exports, that was economically devastating. So Carney coming in and making trade normalization a priority isn't just good politics, it's essential economic policy for regions like Saskatchewan. But let's talk about the political optics here because they are fascinating. Moe is a conservative premier who has built his brand on fighting Ottawa. Carbon tax opposition? That's his thing. Constitutional battles? Is there? Resource development fights? Sign him up. He's been the poster child for Western alienation and federal-provincial tension. And now here he is, praising a Liberal Prime Minister for a trade deal. That tells you two things. One, the deal is legitimately good enough that Moe can't spin it negatively without looking like he's putting politics over Saskatchewan's economic interests. And two, Moe's smart enough to know when to take the win and give credit where it's due, even if it goes against his usual messaging. This is also happening in a very specific context that we can't ignore. Mark Carney just got back from a 9-day international trip trying to drum up investment for Canada. He's been at the World Economic Forum. He's been meeting with global leaders. And now there's this China deal that directly benefits one of Canada's most economically important regions. This isn't coincidental. This is Carney trying to establish himself as a competent economic manager who can navigate complex international relationships and deliver tangible benefits to Canadian industries. And it's working, at least in Saskatchewan, where even the Conservative Premier is going on record with praise. The agriculture industry stakeholders who showed up at Moe's press conference are probably doing backflips right now. Tariff-free access to Chinese markets means they can plan investments, expand operations, hire workers, and actually compete globally without artificial price barriers. For farmers who've been dealing with uncertainty and market volatility, this is stability. This is predictability. This is the ability to make business decisions based on actual market conditions rather than wondering if political tensions are going to tank their export opportunities. And let's zoom out for a second and look at what this means for Canada's overall China strategy, because it's complicated. On one hand, we've got Doug Ford freaking out about Chinese EVs being spy machines. On the other hand, we've got Carney securing trade deals that benefit prairie agriculture. These seem like contradictory approaches until you realize they're actually different aspects of a nuanced relationship with a complicated global power. Canada can be concerned about security issues related to Chinese technology while also recognizing that Chinese markets are essential for Canadian agricultural exports. It's not hypocritical, it's just reality. International relations aren't black and white. They're messy and multifaceted and require balancing competing interests. The fact that this deal covers canola meal specifically is interesting because canola meal is what's left after you extract oil from canola seeds. It's a high-protein livestock feed, and China has massive livestock industries that need feed. So this isn't just about selling raw agricultural products. This is about value-added processing and creating jobs in Canada beyond just farming. Moe mentioned processing workers specifically, and that matters because it means this deal supports jobs across the entire supply chain from the farmer to the processor to the exporter. That's comprehensive economic impact. Moe called this one of the strongest agreements I've seen in my elected time. Coming from a guy who's been in provincial politics long enough to see multiple federal governments and countless trade negotiations, that's significant praise. He's not just saying it's good. He's saying it's among the best he's encountered. And he's saying this about a deal negotiated by a government he's spent years fighting with. That level of praise doesn't come easy to politicians, especially when it goes against their usual narrative. The fact that he's saying it anyway tells you the agreement's substance overcame his political instincts. The timing of this is also worth noting. Carney's trying to establish himself as a legitimate prime minister after a controversial entry into the role. He's dealing with Trump's tariff threats. He's managing complex provincial relations. He's trying to boost Canada's economic position globally. And now he's got a prairie premier who usually hates Ottawa publicly thanking him for a trade deal. That's a political win that Carney desperately needs. It shows he can deliver results. It shows he can work with provinces, even conservative ones that are ideologically opposed to his government. It shows he understands regional economic needs and can translate that understanding into action. For Saskatchewan, this is validation that engaging with the federal government can actually produce results. Moe's been so focused on fighting Ottawa that actually working together and getting positive outcomes has become the exception rather than the rule. This deal proves that collaboration can work when both levels of government focus on shared economic interests rather than political point scoring. And that's a lesson that applies way beyond Saskatchewan agriculture. The canola industry's importance to the Canadian economy can't be overstated. 200,000 jobs. $44 billion in economic activity. And that's concentrated heavily in Western Canada, particularly Saskatchewan and Alberta. When you protect and expand market access for an industry that size, you're not just helping farmers. You're supporting entire communities, rural economies, processing facilities, transportation networks, and all the supporting industries that exist around agriculture. This is the kind of economic policy that has real, measurable impact on people's lives. And can we just appreciate for a second that peas made it into a major international trade agreement? Like, We're out here negotiating tariff elimination on peas with one of the world's largest economies. That sounds silly until you remember that pulses are a massive prairie crop with huge global demand and China's a market of over 1 billion people. Suddenly peas become a very serious economic commodity. Welcome to modern agriculture where everything from canola to chickpeas is big business. The fact that Ralph Goodale called Carney's pivot to China absolutely essential is interesting because Goodale's been around long enough to know what works and what doesn't in federal politics and Western economic policy. He represented Regina for over 2 decades. He knows Saskatchewan. He knows agriculture. He knows China relations. And his saying this move was necessary. That's an endorsement from someone with actual expertise and regional knowledge, not just political spin. What's also fascinating is watching how quickly Moe moved from criticism to praise when actual results materialized. There's a lesson there about governance and political relationships. When federal and provincial governments actually work together toward shared goals, good things can happen. When they spend all their time fighting over jurisdiction and scoring political points, nothing gets done. This deal shows what's possible when both levels put aside the usual warfare and focus on outcomes. But let's be real, this honeymoon probably won't last. Moe will be back to fighting with Ottawa over something else within a week. Carbon tax isn't going anywhere as a point of contention. Resource development battles will continue. This moment of federal-provincial harmony is likely temporary. But for right now, for this specific issue, there's alignment. And Saskatchewan farmers are benefiting from it, which at the end of the day is what actually matters. The broader implication here is that Canada's re-engagement with China on trade is happening despite all the political tension and security concerns. Because at the end of the day, economics matter. Prairie farmers need markets. Chinese consumers need food. Trade makes both sides better off. And while we can and should have serious conversations about security, human rights, and diplomatic relations with China, we also have to acknowledge economic realities. $44 billion industries don't just disappear because international relations get complicated. So here we are. Mark Carney secured a trade deal with China that eliminates tariffs on major prairie exports. Scott Moe, Conservative Premier and frequent federal government critic, publicly credited Carney and called it one of the strongest agreements he's seen. Saskatchewan's agriculture industry is celebrating. And Canadian politics just got a little bit weirder because apparently all it takes to get a prairie premier to praise a Liberal PM is a really good canola deal. Who knew? If you made it through this entire breakdown of canola geopolitics and prairie premier character development, you're clearly invested in Canadian politics and I appreciate you. Hit that like button if you think trade deals that actually benefit Canadian industries are worth celebrating regardless of who negotiates them. Subscribe to Canadian Insights because we're covering every political development across the country multiple times a day, and apparently we live in a timeline where agricultural tariffs are breaking news. Drop a comment with your thoughts on whether this federal-provincial cooperation will last or if Moe will be back to Ottawa bashing by next week. And check out our other videos for more coverage on trade policy, federal-provincial relations, and all the other ways Canadian politics surprises us. Thanks for watching, stay informed, and I'll catch you in the next one where we'll probably be discussing whatever fresh political chaos emerges from this rapidly evolving situation.